Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. When I was in my early 20s, around 2010, I lived alone in a ground floor apartment in what I would say was a decent part of my hometown. It was a bit of a humble but comfortable place, and honestly, I was loving living alone. I didn't dislike living with my parents. I get along well enough with them, but I am more of a loner, and I like to live within my own confines, not someone else's. For the entire first year, things went really well in my apartment. I loved the area. I had furnished the way I liked it, and I was happy. But then, near immediately after I signed my second year's lease, things started happening that made me reconsider whether or not I really was safe. At first, the things that would happen were incredibly subtle. I would come home from work and I would find various things that seemed out of place, but that I couldn't be sure about. The first thing was one day when I got home, I found my front door was unlocked. I kind of freaked out a bit at first, but as I thought about it, that morning I was in a super rush because I was running late, and it was wholly impossible that I forgot to lock it. I went in and I checked everything, and as far as I could tell, nothing had been taken or moved. I chalked it up to a, "Hey dummy, that was stupid" moment, and then I moved on. A couple days later, I came home to my door being unlocked again, and again, I was incredibly mad at myself for having left it unlocked like that. However, when I went inside to make sure nothing was missing, it pretty quickly clicked that it wasn't my doing. When I walked in, I noticed that the lamp in the corner of my living room was turned on, which to most people wouldn't be a huge deal, right? But to me, it was a massive issue. I never used that lamp. It was a room lamp from my room at my parents' that I took, so that they didn't have to deal with it. But I haven't had to use it because the living room has a ceiling light. So I just put it in the corner behind an extra chair because it looked nice there. But again, I never used it. I checked the rest of the apartment, but again, there was nothing missing. I actually went across the hall and asked one of my neighbors if they saw anyone coming in or going from my apartment that day, and they didn't recall anyone being there. I mentioned the whole thing and they were a bit shocked, but again, they couldn't give me any information. I ended up calling the main office to let them know what was going on, and they mentioned that it could have been maintenance because they were doing pest control on my building at some point that week, but they should have left a note if it was them. I told them that there was no note on my door, and my neighbors said that they hadn't seen anyone, which made me think that it wasn't the maintenance crew at all. They told me that they would ask the crew and see if it was them, and then told me to call them back if it happened again, and that they would try to figure out a way to get the situation taken care of. And, of course, something did happen again. One night, I got home and when I opened my door, I found an envelope on the floor on the other side of the door, like it had been slid under. I initially assumed that it was a note from the office or the maintenance crew, but normally they just tape those to the front door and not slide them under. I grabbed it, put my stuff down, and I opened the letter to see what they had to say. And what it said made my blood run cold when I read it. It was a typed and unsigned note that said, "You look so peaceful when you sleep. I was freaking out in my head. Who had been watching me sleep? Had someone actually been watching me? Or was this some screwed up prank? There was no evidence that anyone had been in my apartment beyond the lamp and my door being unlocked twice, which to me was a mountain of evidence, but to anyone on the outside could just be coincidences. Of course, this letter was a big red flag screaming, "I'm watching you." But who the hell was the person that typed it? After the letter, I started taking precautions with everything in my apartment. I double-checked all the locks on the windows. I kept all my curtains and blinds closed, and I put belts on every door so I could tell if they were opened. And I bought a metal baseball bat that sat right next to my bed. I had also reported the letter to the office, who made a police report with my information, and they had an officer that would circle the area multiple times a day to see if they could find anyone suspicious. But despite this, things would still end up happening. I would come home to find my fridge open, my bathroom sink running, the books on my shelf removed and piled on the floor. I seriously thought that I was just going insane. I begged the rental office to change the locks on my door, and I told them every single thing that happened, and they were completely unhelpful beyond telling me to get a camera and that they couldn't do anything else. This was my home. I was supposed to feel safe there, and the company responsible for that safety was basically telling me that I was out of luck. I was starting to feel depressed and anxious all the time because I was thinking that this person was going to escalate and eventually they were going to hurt me, or worse. I hit a wall mentally. I wasn't sure what to do, and I did end up buying a camera, one that I could hang up in the corner that watched the door. But part of me thought that this person was going to be able to beat the camera and then get in to mess with me without being seen. Of course, that would be impossible, and the last day of all of this was probably the most excited that I have ever been. I came home from another day at work to find my door unlocked again. I walked into my apartment, more pissed off than scared, and in the kitchen found another envelope taped to a bottle of wine. I grabbed the letter and opened it, and this time, it was a bit more terrifying. The item on the envelope was a printed photograph of me at work, and on the back of it said, "You're always so busy." And it was a picture of me serving a table that I had waited on only a day prior, which meant this person had been in my restaurant and they were now following me in my everyday life. I started to panic, but I quickly turned my attention to the camera in the corner of my room. This guy had the gall to not only walk in, but walk right in front of the camera to get into my kitchen. When I got to my computer and got the footage loaded, I was speechless. I watched as this man opened my front door with ease, walked in with a huge smile on his face, and put the bottle of wine on the counter. I watched as he put the photo on the counter and then wrote his note on the back of it and then placed it in an envelope. The reason I had that level of excitement, as I mentioned earlier, was because I knew who this was. It was one of the maintenance guys for the property. I'd seen him on the property and I'd waved at him. I'd had short passing conversations with him and all of that sort. I called the office and I told them that I had a video of the person breaking into my place, and I asked one of the managers to come to my apartment so that I could show them. Well, they did, and I could tell by the look on his face that he wasn't surprised to see what I was showing him. To wrap this up a bit quicker, I called the police and I showed them the evidence. And after he was arrested, it came out that this wasn't his first offense. He had been arrested and reported of stalking numerous other women. The reason that the office manager wasn't surprised was because he knew full well that this guy had done this before. Apparently, he was what they called a second chance hire. They knew that he had a record of stalking, and when I told them that I was being stalked, they didn't put two and two together. I have no problem with second chance hires. People deserve a second chance when they make mistakes. But this was a textbook case of, yeah, we hired a man known for stalking women. We have a woman being stalked, but maybe we should consider that. Thankfully, the police took this all very seriously, and because he had a record, they had zero tolerance for his actions, and he went away in cuffs. And, of course, after he was arrested, all of the craziness stopped. Obviously, I moved out of that property and into a new apartment. The inaction of the property management was enough to help me break my lease, which I happily did. This happened to me about 2 to 3 years ago. When I was 16, I used to work at a fast food restaurant, and I live in a place where we have all the seasons. At this point in time, it was winter, so it got dark pretty early at around like 5 or 6 p.m. I was called to come into work this particular day, but the weather was kind of bad, causing us not to have any customers. As a result, we had to close the store early. It was about 5:30 p.m. when my manager left, locking the store and making me wait outside for my ride. About 20 minutes had passed since she left. I was feeling really cold, so I decided that I would walk to a friend's house just a few blocks away, about a 10-minute walk, and wait for my ride there. The store I worked at was on a busy street that was near a residential neighborhood. As I walked away from the store, I started walking down the residential street behind the store. I was walking on the sidewalk to the left of the street, as there is only one sidewalk on the right side of the street. If I walked on the right sidewalk, I'd only walk on it for a block, then I would have to walk the rest of the way on the road, and there were also woods on that side too. It was convenient as well because on the left side of the street was my store, and there were no streetlights. I was about 3/4 of the block when I got this feeling that I was being watched. The neighborhood was really dark, and at this point, I had pretty much reached the end of the block and was getting ready to cross the street when I noticed a silhouette of someone walking on the right side of the road near the woods. About 5'9" or 5'10", and looked to be maybe 180 to 200 pounds. I couldn't make out any features though. I'm the type of person who's very aware of their surroundings and slightly paranoid, as I've been followed and almost kidnapped and stalked and etc. You get the gist. So when I noticed him, I stopped walking and immediately got a sick feeling in my stomach. The man noticed me and proceeded to walk slowly and then yell out at me. He says, "Yo, come here. I want to talk to you." And I say back, "No, I'm good. I'm only 16. Then I turned around and I start walking back to my store. He continues to yell things at me, trying to convince me to come to him. At that point, something in me told me to run, and I did just that. As I'm running, I know I shouldn't have, but I turned my head to see if he was actually chasing me. And to my horror, he was. So I turned up the speed and I ran as fast as I can. Thankfully, as I reached the store, my ride had pulled up, so I ran to the car. As I tried to get in, The door was locked. It took about 20 seconds for them to unlock the car, which felt like hours. But eventually, I got in and I just broke down crying. I'm not gonna lie, I'm kinda out of shape, so my back was hurting from breathing so hard and I was all frazzled. This was the first time that I was chased on foot, and let me tell you, it's so much more scary, surreal, and intense being chased on foot than someone chasing you by car. Still to this day, I have added trauma from this incident, and it makes it hard to go anywhere by myself, especially in the dark. So, to the man that chased after me in the dark, let's not meet again.
Stalked me using technology. When I was in my early 20s, I dated a friend of a friend. We were mutual friends. We saw each other before, but we never really interacted. We certainly knew each other by name. We met at a party and he was great at first. He was friendly and made good conversation and was pretty good looking too. I was instantly interested in him and we had great chemistry with each other. We met up constantly and I was so happy I decided to give him a chance. Months in, we decided to go steady and be exclusive with each other. We set our statuses on Facebook and some other places too. We took so many pictures together and posted them on social media. And for nearly 10 months things were going fantastic. He slept over my place plenty of times and I stayed at his too. I really enjoyed being with him. One day I wasn't feeling the best, so I told him I wanted a quiet day and spent the day on my computer in a video call with my friends. We were all laughing and watching a movie together. It was so good to have some girl time together because I spent so much time with my boyfriend. One of my friends, I'll call her Dana, made a comment about missing me and jokingly said that I was spending way too much time with him. The next day I didn't hear from my ex, and it wasn't like him to not send a message by now. I messaged him and said good morning. He looked at it and left me on read. Weird, but maybe he was too busy to answer, and I didn't worry about it. I waited a couple of hours and sent another message to ask if he was okay. He told me he was fine, and I knew he was clearly not fine. He'd never acted like this before and I was surprised by it. I told him if he was angry with me, I'd rather he told me why. He asked how sick I was and I told him it must have been a temporary stomach bug. And that when I felt a little better, I went on a video call with my friends and we watched a movie. He seemed satisfied by my answer. And at the time I wasn't exactly sure why. I was just happy that he had calmed down. Things were good again. But months later we had some more relationship difficulties. He told me he didn't like some of my friends and that he didn't want me to see them anymore. I asked him exactly what he didn't like about them. He just told me he didn't think they were a good fit for me, but wouldn't explain exactly why. There was one person in particular he didn't like, and that was Dana. He always made little nasty comments about her, implying that she was a bad person. I told him I needed a reason why he wanted me to cut them off, and I didn't like him interfering with my friendships. He scowled and didn't speak to me for a couple of days. I talked to Dana about it, and she wasn't sure where the hostility was coming from. She had always been civil with him. I thought that would be the end of it, but no. He slipped one time and mentioned something I told Dana in private. I thought maybe Dana said it to someone else and asked her about it. She denied it. I was angry about this and he supported me, told me to stop being friends with her, and if I loved him, I would do it. I hated that. I vented to some of my friends both on my phone and on the computer about it. I said how frustrated I was, that he had no right to do what he did, and that it wasn't fair of him to do this. When he confronted me about it, he knew near enough everything I said. I doubted all my friends would have run off to tell him, and some of them barely knew him. or only knew of him. I asked how he knew and he got incredibly defensive. This went on for months, and whenever we had any issues he would always know about them. It turns out he put spyware on my phone and a keylogger on my computer. Probably when I wasn't looking or he needed to borrow my phone or computer for something. I confronted him about this massive breach of privacy and he said it was normal. That all couples do this. I screamed at him this wasn't normal at all. He told me that all his exes had been fine with it. And I reminded him that he never even mentioned it to me. And I certainly wouldn't have agreed. Nor did he ever offer to show me his phone or other devices. I got my computer and phone cleared of any nasties, changed passwords, and did everything I could to protect myself. I made sure I changed all my passwords at a friend's place too. After a while, I couldn't relax, so I ended up getting a new phone and computer when I could. I couldn't shake the feeling he was spying on me for a long time after. I make sure to lock all my devices now. I also regularly check to make sure my information hasn't been leaked, and made sure there were no changes to my private information. It has been so stressful and it could have been avoided if I was more careful. What was even creepier, he left hidden cameras in my room at some point. I'm terrified what he did with those pictures or videos. I change in there. I have so many private moments in there. It's supposed to be my sanctuary. Sometimes I can't escape the feeling I'm being watched. This story won't be the worst story on your list, I guess. I don't let my partners use my devices anymore, unless I'm there to keep an eye on what they're doing. I don't like how he invaded my privacy and had access to my information without my permission. I don't even like inviting people into my room anymore. I just want to feel safe again. Keep an eye on your devices, people.
Back when I was about 17, I took a job at a local fast food restaurant that had only one location, and they specialized in chicken. Not really relevant what they served, but I will say that it was probably one of my favorite places to eat in, because it was seriously good. Plus, I had my own little ways of making things even better when I ordered food. You know, the quirks of knowing the kitchen. That said, as good as the food was, this place tended to attract some of the worst people, both on the employee side and the customer side. I don't know what this says about me being an employee, but I like to believe that I was one of the better ones there. We had cops come in and arrest some of our employees in the past for some drug-related charges, and typically, they went in without a fight. But there was one time that a guy tried to run at the cops with a fryer basket. That was sort of entertaining. He got tased and that was pretty much the end of it. Anyways, this isn't a fast food horror story, though I could send you one of those sometime. This is a story about one coworker in general named Corey. Corey was probably the quietest person to ever work there at the restaurant, and the most self-contained person I think that I had ever seen. He was the type to always move out of your way when you were heading in his direction. He would basically cower back when you approached him, and he was really antisocial. He wouldn't really talk to anyone and was really bad at communication, which can really be a problem when it comes to working in a kitchen, even if it's just fast food. Well, fast forward to him working there about a month, and I was stuck on a closing shift with him. It went okay for the most part. I did most of the cleanup work in the lobby and the front line, and he had to clean up in the back where the cooking stations were. It was mostly normal, until right around the end of the shift, when we were doing a final walkthrough of the walk-in freezer. I entered to check the shelves and do a once-over on the day dots to make sure that they weren't out of date, and then we're done. And then he enters behind me and stares me dead in the face and asks, "Is there really just the one way out of here? Like, if I were to shut, and block the door, you wouldn't be able to get out, right? I kind of just stared at him with a look of, "You're joking, right?" on my face. He quickly stepped it back, saying, "Not that I would do that, I was just curious, like, isn't that technically a safety hazard?" I decided not to answer his question, and I finished up on my checks and then said that we could go. As we left the building and I locked up, he asked me if I wanted a ride home. Again, I just kind of stared at him. I had my own car, and it was the only other car in the parking lot. I thanked him, but I told him that I could manage. He then asked me if I wanted him to follow me home, just in case. This was seriously the third huge blaring red flag to blow out of this guy in less than half an hour. I just told him goodnight, and I quickly walked away to my car with my keys in my fingers, just in case. On my way out, I actually called the manager of the store and reported what Corey had said to me in the freezer, and mentioned that I didn't really feel comfortable working the shift alone with him anymore. My boss was an awesome lady, and she was more than willing to work within the confines of what the owner would let her. That night was the last night that I closed alone with him, or he closed alone with anyone actually. Every night he was a closer. There were now 3 people on the last shift. Of course, this wasn't the last time he did something creepy. About a couple of weeks later, he actually asked me why there had to be a third person in our closing shift. I shrugged, and I mentioned that the boss just wanted to make sure that things got done on time and the right way, so having 3 people made it easier. I then heard him mumble about how he missed just working with me at night. I let it go, mostly because I thought he wasn't going to be able to be that creepy person he was being. But that same night, he proved that to be an incorrect statement. After we closed, I was on my way home, not really paying much attention to anything around me. But when I looked up in my rear view at a red light, I realized that he was seriously behind me. I had never seen him drive the same direction as I did when we got off of work, but I had to think logically and accept that maybe, just maybe, he had a reason to be over here. I kept on down the road thinking that he would turn or pull off somewhere. But no matter what turn I took, he kept up behind me. At that time, being 17, I lived with my parents, so I called my dad and I told him that I thought I was being followed. He told me to come straight home and that he would be waiting outside. Sure enough, when I pulled in, my dad was waiting by the driveway with a handgun strapped to his side. And sure enough, Corey had followed me the entire way, but when I pulled into the driveway, he sped past me. My dad was obviously curious if I knew the guy. I told him that he was a coworker that was a bit of a weirdo and that he had been a bit of a creep to me in the past. He was pretty upset by this, which was understandable, but I told him that I had it under control and that management was aware of the whole thing. That night was actually the height of all of this, not just him driving by, but what he did after. It was a Friday night, and it was pretty late, but I wasn't able to sleep because of the whole thing with Corey following me. I was sitting on my couch and watching a movie to try and get myself to pass out, when out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a car had pulled into the driveway. I thought for a moment that they were going to just turn around, but they sat there for a few moments. I felt a bit scared. I kind of shrunk down along the wall and peeked out. And to my surprise, I saw Corey walking up to the door. I was about to get up and seriously start yelling at this guy, but then he smashed the window on the door with what looked like a hammer. I stood there just freaking out for several moments, and my dad came running down the stairs with a gun in hand, and he started screaming at Corey. It all felt like it was in slow motion, but it was actually pretty fast. My dad seriously pinned him down to the ground while my mom called the cops. And when they got there, I had to explain to the police what I saw and the whole situation with Corey at work. And honestly, it was a nightmare. I thought this guy was just this quiet and maybe a bit awkward guy, but he was legit crazy. He was arrested since he was on the property, and they found a hammer by him when they showed up. I have no idea what happened to him, and sure, this may not seem like too much of a crazy stalker story, but for the short time that this guy stalked me, it was awful. I'm glad he didn't escalate any further than smashing in the door's glass, but he also didn't have time to do so. But who knows what he would have done beyond that? I'm thankful I haven't seen him since that happened, and honestly, Corey, I'd be more than happy if we never meet again. When I first got out of the army, I was in a relationship with a guy in 3rd Range Battalion. Let's call him Jim Reedus. He and I had an apartment together, and I thought that I loved him, so instead of going back to my home in Nebraska, I stayed in Columbus. Our relationship started out with him being what I thought was protective over me. Even though I was very attractive at that time, I had very low self-esteem because of an assault that I experienced while I was living in the barracks and the bullying that I endured afterward. Things moved very quickly. In fact, we were inseparable from the night we met. Anytime another man looked at me, he would get very confrontational toward the guy. I felt safe and protected by this. It made me feel special. I thought that he must really value me if he would get so upset by a guy looking my way. At first. Soon, we would be out at a bar, and he would get hammered every single time, and then act very nasty toward me if he thought that I was looking at another guy. This would cause bitter fights, and I would always end up in a fetal position in bed sobbing. But still, I stayed. The next day, he would always apologize, making excuses about it being because he was so drunk, but then he would proceed to explain to me why what I had done was wrong. It wasn't long before that I found myself totally isolated from my friends and family because he was so insecure. He made me take all of my phone calls on speakerphone. My family begged me to leave, but I was afraid that I couldn't get by on my own. Then one night, we came home from the bar in the usual fashion, him screaming in my face and me sobbing. I told him that I was going to get a room at a motel, and he just lost his freaking mind. He yanked the keys out of the ignition and then threw them into the woodline. He then got out of my car and proceeded to kick in the front quarter panel of my car. He used so much force that the hinges to the passenger door went bent. I told the insurance company that it was a hit and run, or I would never have been able to get the damage fixed. He screamed at me to get inside the apartment, but I couldn't unlock the door without my keys, which he blamed me for. He then grabbed me and started shoving me into the door, first by my shoulders, then with his hands around my throat, screaming, "Can't you see how much I love you?" I rasped and said, No, I can't." And he let go, and I fell to the ground in a heap. That night, I had finally had enough. I was finally so angry that I didn't feel afraid anymore. That morning, while he was sleeping it off, I began to make plans. I started by telling him that he had to leave and move back into the barracks. When he refused, I had to get his chain of command involved to make him leave the apartment and go back to live in the barracks, on someone's couch, in the street, anywhere, as long as it wasn't with me. But then, he stalked me mercilessly. I filed for an OP, but he bullied me into dropping it. I knew I would never be free from him if I stayed. So my parents sent me some money via Western Union. This was around in 2002, and I rented a Penske truck and a trailer. I got help from my male neighbor friends to load it up as soon as the sun set, and I brought it from where I had hidden it. My best chance was to leave under the cover of darkness. I was really sick that night, and I was running a fever of 103 degrees. But I knew it had to be then. It just couldn't wait. I just told myself that I had to get out of the city limits, then I can pull over and then sleep a little bit. I figured that I would just drive as much as I could and then rest when I couldn't push any harder. I put my puppy in the cab of the truck with me, towed my car behind the truck, and then I left. I don't know how, except through divine intervention, but somehow I managed to drive non-stop from Fort Benning to my parents' home in rural Nebraska. I stopped only for fuel, at which time I would feed, water, and walk my little dog Scruffy, use the facilities, and get what food and drink that I could afford on my meager budget. I drove 14 hours and I pulled into my parents' drive at around 10 a.m. CST. I crashed on their old couch and slept for nearly 24 hours straight. I still hope for nothing but pain and suffering for him. He turned me on to pills, then coke, then crack, all the while he was on active duty. He was a scumbag of a soldier and a man. He reached out to me on social media a couple of years ago, and I told him what a piece of steaming shit he was, and I told him to rot in hell. It felt amazing, even after all these years, to say that to him and have him be the one stammering. I'm actually glad that he reached out to me and gave me the opportunity to verbally rip him into shreds. I'm not afraid of you anymore, Jim. So, let's not meet again. So one night, me and my friends were playing some hide and seek in our hometown. We were probably like 13 at that time. So I went into a small area that is basically like a shortcut from the main road to the side road. I, unfortunately, went alone and I didn't even think of what can happen. Remember, we were only 13 at that time and we didn't bring phones with us. So if something happened to us, nobody would even know. So the game started and I ran sprinting to the wooded area. The first 30 seconds was good. Disclaimer, we have a rule that we have to come to the checkpoint where we start, and we have to save ourselves from not getting picked to search. After around 1 minute, I start hearing footsteps, so I say, "Hello? Are you one of my friends?" And something that was there didn't say anything, so I started backing out. Fortunately, the woods area has a main route and 2 side ones, so I could have run either way. I start backing out, and from nowhere, the man just appears from the woods and starts sprinting at me while saying, "I'm gonna catch you," in a creepy and eerie way, like a kidnapper. Fortunately, I trained football, so I knew that I can definitely outrun him, or at least make him tired. so I sprint all my way through the woods with only light being the moonlight. And after around 2 minutes, he gave up. I continued sprinting, and I got myself all the way to the checkpoint, and I told all of my friends what just happened. Of course, no one believed me, but I didn't care since I knew that it was real. And to this day, I still don't know who or what had tried to catch me that night, but for sure, I know that if I wasn't a sports guy, the outcome would be very, very different.
Scary gaming friend. Sent in by Anonymous. I used to game a lot with a group of friends I met online. We used to play Left 4 Dead 2 and other games like that, and we had a lot of fun together. Eventually we branched into playing other games as well, and we would often speak together on Skype or TeamSpeak. This was quite a while ago, and before Discord became more popular. Some of the group lived close enough to meet each other in real life too. There was a group of us that would play or who would join the call while the others were gaming. I was dating one of the men in the group. We'll call him Chris, and things were going pretty well. We'd spend time alone talking with each other, and then we would go hang out with the rest of the friend group. Chris had a friend who became one of mine. We'll call her Sadie. She was always his best friend, and I had no issues with this. Sadie would constantly bug us when we were on a date or had any alone time together. I didn't say anything at the time, but she would always have some catastrophe right when we were having an anniversary or some other important occasion. Chris wanted to be a good friend to her, and so did I. So the first couple of times we would stop what we were doing to spend time with her. But it just kept happening. We were on a romantic date and she would show up crying about something. When she came in, she flopped on the couch and cried loudly, begging us to stay the night. I told Chris that this needs to stop, so we talked to her and told her we couldn't drop everything for her. She was angry with me and blamed me. At first, she refused to talk to me, and then started doing passive-aggressive little jabs at me constantly. I ignored her, thinking she would drop it eventually. Chris' birthday was coming up soon and I wanted to get him something nice. I told the other girls in the group about it. It was silly, but it was a box of chocolates he got for me when we first started dating, and he hadn't had them since. It was small, but very sentimental to us. Sadie heard about it and went and bought it for him. I told her that I wanted to get it for him special, and she told me I was being ridiculous. Chris didn't really answer me when I told him about it, and said he was happy to spend the night with me. So I focused on that instead. We went out to dinner, and I heard the infamous beeps that I was getting messages. I saw my phone had all the group messages, and I ignored it. The night wore on, and we decided to relax at home. Then Sadie started calling and texting both of us. She wouldn't stop even when we told her we were busy. We both muted her and focused on enjoying the night together. Chris got up to get some drinks for us when he saw his phone light up. He asked me to check his messages for him, and it wasn't strange for us to do this as a couple either. I couldn't believe the amount of unread messages he had from her. During this time, Sadie sent him news and told him to break up with me. I was done. I was so effing done with her after that. I messaged her and told her to stay the hell away from me. Chris told her no, and eventually he blocked her. She tried contacting us through mutual friends, and to avoid issues, we made a new gaming group. I started getting random phone calls and texts late at night. She started sending pictures of her cutting herself and told me it was my fault this was happening. That if she ended up in hospital it was because I was a bad friend and that I hated her. That nothing would have happened if I didn't flip out, and I should have let her come over, about how mean I was being, etc. I do my best to try to help everyone, even strangers, but I have limits of what kind of behavior I will tolerate. I ignored her despite how hard it was. A part of me felt guilty. I talked to some other friends and they said her behavior was not normal, and what she did was really messed up. Chris was sad about it, and went over to her house to see if she was okay. They'd been friends for a long time, and I knew he felt horrible about it. He came back and told me she blamed me for everything. Later on that night, I received multiple messages from Sadie wanting to be friends again. I kept deleting and blocking her, again and again. She sent me messages saying she wanted to talk about this like adults, and I was behaving like a child for not answering her. She made some snide comments about insecurities I had told her, and later that she was done with me. I heard later on she made Facebook statuses about the trash taking itself out, and I was a horrible B-word and all that. Sadie was also saying I only wanted to talk to her because I was useful and that I was jealous of her. It quietened down when Chris told me what Sadie had done, and they got his side of the story. I haven't heard from or seen Sadie in years, not that I want to either. Chris and I didn't end up staying together, not that I expected us to. We broke up over something unrelated. I've heard him and Sadie are friends again. I'm still in touch with some of the other friends and others that have moved on. It happens. I have happier friendships now, and whenever I tell people this story, they're always amazed that someone could behave this way.
This happened to me when I was around 15, in my sophomore year in high school. I played the drums in a band, I was on the track team, and I took the weights class, so I'd like to think that I was a semi-popular and fit guy. I had a lot of friends, and quite a few girls had a crush on me, so I never really had a dull moment. I also tended to stay out late with my friends. We never really did anything that would get us into legal trouble, but I think we pushed our limits at times. This situation occurred one weekend when I went to my friend Dylan's birthday party. At our age, we just wanted to hang out with our friends, whereas some of our moms still thought that we were kids and wanted to have a full-blown party with games and stuff like that. But thankfully, Dylan was able to come to an agreement with his mom. He had a party with friends and a few family members, but then we had an extra few hours after cake and ice cream just to chill around. When I got there and I saw a few older people, like his aunt and his uncle, I cringed, thinking that we were going to do the weird pin the tail or some piñata games. But that's when he explained to me that I was one of the few that he invited over earlier during the family part of the party. And after a few hours, that's when more of our friends started showing up. His house was huge. Well, at least to my younger self. He had 2 living rooms, which I thought was really cool because they had their Xbox and Wii setup in the back living room, as well as a karaoke machine. So, us kids got to be left alone while his parents and other family members stayed in the front. I had 2 siblings, and me being the oldest, we had a Wii that had to stay in the living room. But if someone was watching TV, like my parents, then we couldn't play it or take it to my room since I don't have a TV in there. So with Dylan's family having a specific room to play anytime, I thought he was lucky. There were a few of us that showed up and stayed the whole time, that being me, Dylan, Cody, Jocelyn, Sydney, and her friend Ashlyn. We were taking turns playing games and watching Dylan change the wheels on his skateboard that he just got. The girls were just talking to themselves quietly, but then they would also talk to us briefly to make some kind of joke or maybe ask a question. But after a few, and us still being kids, we got bored. But we weren't ready to leave yet, so the girls decided that we should play some kind of truth or dare game. I don't remember exactly how they did it, but it was like a combination of charades, but we put different questions or dares in like a hat, but then we had to pick a name first to do it, so it was more randomized. Now, before I continue, I wanted to explain that me and Jocelyn dated very briefly. We hung out together, held hands, and then made out, but that was it. We didn't really click, so we both decided that we worked better as friends and then called it off. Sydney was pretty cool. We had hung out before, but nothing too close. And Ashlyn, we just saw in passing really. We were in one class together and we were partnered together, but never really talked outside of that. I didn't even have her number like I did the other two girls there. Anyways, we all agreed being teens, thinking that we would get to show off or something, and we all started writing our questions and also our dares. And of course, as it would turn out, one of the questions that would come up is if you have a crush on anyone, and Ashlyn got it. She said that she did, and it was someone here. So everyone started awkwardly giggling. Then, I got a dare to kiss someone, and the name that I pulled was Ashlyn. I really didn't think much of it, but she turned beet red and couldn't stop smiling and giggling. Finally, Sydney pushed her to get it over with, and we did the dare and moved on. And from then, her color didn't really change, and I would catch her looking at me smiling. I was a young kid, so I'd be lying if I said that it didn't make me feel good about myself. I still didn't really know her though, and what she was like, so I didn't really have an attraction there. So the night continued as such, random embarrassing facts learned, and a few people had to kiss others, and a duet sing together, but it was an alright night. Later on, as everyone was leaving, Ashlyn gave me a quick hug, nearly knocking me back, and ran out of the door, saying something to Sydney. As I was about to leave, Dylan made a comment to me about Ashlyn liking me. He told me that Sydney specifically asked if I was going to be there and if she could bring a friend, but was told not to tell me. It was pretty obvious, so I went about my night, knowing that I probably just made hers. I thought maybe that if I got to know her, then she might be my type and we could actually hit it off. Well, nope. Cue the stalker vibes. Since Ashlyn was in the one class, she called me over when I walked in to have me sit by her, which was really fine by me. She looked different. She was wearing makeup, a low-cut shirt, and also straightened her hair. I will say, she had naturally really curly hair, like the girl from the movie Brave, which I loved, and it looked great on her. So it was weird seeing it straight. She tried being very open and talkative, but she wasn't used to it, so it was a little awkward but nothing too bad. She didn't make any moves or anything though, but I think that was just her still being too shy. I told her that she looked nice though, but it seemed to fluster her more. When the class ended, she would go talk to Sydney and whisper and giggle as I walked by. But then, I started getting notes shoved in my locker through the vent. They would say different things from, "You're cute" and "I want you," or "you plus me after school," and things like that. It was safe to assume who it was from. It was fine, really, even though there were multiples a day. Every single day. But then it started going over when there was one taped to the front of my locker. People were passing by laughing and taking pictures. Till I saw what it was. It was a picture of me at the track field with hearts and a "Love you always" written on it. Like someone took a crappy picture of me on the field. It was a bit embarrassing, so I pulled it off, crumpled it, and I tossed it in my locker. I ran late to the class with Ashlyn in it, so I ended up sitting in the front and not next to her. When class ended, she seemed to leave pretty quickly, but didn't act like her normal self. She stopped and talked to Sydney, and they just looked at me as I walked by. I was thinking maybe she realized that she went too far, so I felt no reason to say anything, and I just carried on. That wouldn't stop though. Not only did I continue to get notes, but they got more aggressive, like, "I miss you. When you avoid me, it really makes me sad." And things like that. Then I started getting texts. I had limited texts and talk at that time, so if I went over too many or got close, my parents made sure to tell me. So at first, when I got something saying, "Hey cutie," I was fine with it. I asked who it was and they said, "It's your secret admirer." I asked if it was the same person that sent the notes and they said yes. They asked me if I liked them, and that's when I said that the one on the outside was too much and kind of weird, and they apologized and said it wouldn't happen again, and then I left it at that, thinking that, hey, now we don't have to mention it in person and then be weird about it, right? They started asking more about me and would carry on for the next few weeks. I told them that I was limited on time, so we could always hang out together instead, and they said that this was easier for them, so I agreed, but still said that I was limited. That didn't stop the texts or even calls that I would get in the middle of class, while eating dinner with my family, at midnight, when I was trying to sleep. And when they did call, I answered a few times, but they just sat there silently. It was just weird, but also frustrating because I didn't expect this from Ashlyn, or at least she didn't seem the clingy type. But as time went on, the calls and texts continued, and I even started getting pictures of myself again on the track field with a risk tags. At one point, I had to pair up for another project in another class, and the girl that I was paired with was sent a threatening letter about staying away from their man or else she would get hurt. So she asked to be paired with someone else, and I then had to have a meeting with a teacher asking who I was with because it was going to be a problem, and she had a hard time believing me and explained the note to me. I was already getting annoyed. My parents got onto me about my phone time, and the notes and the guilt trips from someone that I wasn't even dating were getting old. And now she's threatening people and saying that we're dating. All this, and she won't even hardly talk to me outside of class. Why would you pretend to be my girlfriend then? So, I decided to confront her about it. I went to the class that we were both in, walked past her desk as she motioned for me, smiling. I just looked past her and sat elsewhere. I looked over at her once when she wasn't, and she looked nervous. Then when the class ended, I approached her, and as she started saying something, I cut her off and told her to knock it off. I said something along the lines of, "I don't know how you got my number, but lose it. You're insane and way too dramatic and clingy. You're not even the person I thought you were, and I'm not interested and never will be interested in you, so leave me alone." I was really mean, and to this day, I still feel bad about it. She again turned red, and I could see the tears in her eyes, and she ran down the hall. She went right past Sydney, who I could tell was pissed at me, and then ran after her. I went through the rest of the day, not hearing or seeing her, but I felt horrible. I tried to contact her at the number that texted me, but there was no response. I tried texting Sydney, and she actually demanded that we talk about it, so I called her. I started telling her about everything, and she seemed so dumbfounded by it all, like she had never heard of any of this. Being such good friends with her, it was hard to believe. However, she explained to me that she asked Ashlyn on several occasions if she wanted my number, but she always said no. because she wanted to get it from me. Then, how did she get my number? I told her about the notes, and she said that she knew she sent one, but it just had her number on it, and she taped it on the outside, but I never got that one. She said that she remembered the one of me taped on the outside, and she had talked to Ashlyn about it because she was upset, thinking that I was seeing someone, and that thought started to solidify since I didn't sit by her that day and going forward. As we talked more, the things I told her about she swore Ashlyn didn't do or wouldn't do. So then I argued, who else would do it then? And we had no idea. That's when Sydney got a call from Ashlyn, so she said that she would call me back. She did tell Ashlyn she wanted to hang out with her that day to talk about things, but that she wanted me to be there to figure things out. I was hesitant, but I agreed. She lived a few blocks over, so I just walked over there, and Ashlyn ended up getting dropped off there. I stayed out back, playing with her little brother while they talked, and then she came and got me. I was glad Sid was so quick on things, because that prompt meetup really cleared things up for us. Ashlyn told Sydney what happened, and then she came and got me, and Ashlyn looked horrified that I was there. Before she could take off though, Sydney stopped her and explained to her what was happening. I helped explain the details and confirmed it all, and by the look on her face, it told me that none of this was her. Yet, she was still apologizing. I should have been the one apologizing because I had gone off on her, and thankfully, she accepted and understood. The mystery was still there though. Who the hell was behind all of this? That's when Sydney explained why she had her come over. Ashlyn had gotten a threatening text saying to stay away from me or she would get beat too. However, this person was dumb enough to use the same number that they were texting me from pretending to be Ashlyn. So, who was it? So Sydney grabbed her home phone and then started calling the number. A guy answered the phone at first, but Sydney, being the genius she is, told them, "Yeah, I missed a call from this number, but I don't know who this is. I go to..." And then she named our high school. And then the guy that answered yelled, "Jocelyn, someone from your school's on the phone." And that's when we heard shuffling, and then the call was disconnected. And then it all started to make sense, at least some. It was my friend Jocelyn. She was pretending to be Ashlyn, semi-stalking me at the field and in my classes, which would make sense since she was in the class where I was paired up with a girl that changed partners. She probably took the note off my locker with Ashlyn's number, getting hers, and then writing all the other ones, making her look crazy. To do what? Drive me away from her, I guess? Sydney didn't really know much about Jocelyn, but left me to confront her instead, and I again apologized to both of them. They told me to stay and hang out, but I was feeling guilty and awkward, so I left. I wanted to take care of things with Jocelyn anyways. I got home, and I called her number that I had saved, and I learned that it had been disconnected. So it would seem that she got a new number and decided to use it to her advantage. It wasn't all that interesting when she was confronted though. It was before school started and we were all waiting for class to start. Words were said and I think I sufficiently embarrassed her too. We don't talk anymore, but she did start dating one of my friends, which more power to them I suppose. It keeps her occupied. But me and Ashlyn turned out fine. We started hanging out more and actually started dating too. She teases me about it at times too, but I was just glad to move past it. If I never have a weird stalker or crush again, it would be too soon. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.